Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Our Own Devices with Nandagopal Rajan. And as expected, this is Nandagopal Rajan saying hi with another episode. And with this episode, we are going to touch an issue which has been, top of our minds literally for a long time now in India, and people are still a little bit confused about this topic. And what we are going to talk about are drones. If you go to many parts of the world, especially in Southeast Asia, like in Taiwan or Thailand, and you will see the city sky is full of drones of all shapes and sizes. People are having fun. Other things are also happening. I've seen even cops use drones, and even in India, cops use drones. But it is still a very muddled space, and the only place where you actually see drones now is when you are, uh, you know, in a wedding, literally in any part of the country, and then you feel a cool draft of air suddenly come into the room. Then you know there is a drone above you trying to get a photo of you or a video of you having those rasgullas or gulab jamuns. But there is much more to drones, and it's a space that is very important given how our world is progressing. And to talk about that, we have Mr. Umakant Soni, who is CEO and co-founder of ARTPARK, to tell us a little bit more about ARTPARK and what they do, and to discuss in detail about drones. Mr. Soni, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. This is fantastic to be discussing such an interesting topic with you. Very quickly, my background, I'm Umakant Soni. Spent close to 20 years in making lots of errors in building products, technologies, uh, doing startups, investing, and now helping in policy creation. So I'm actually, I describe myself as sum of all errors, except that I've been making them in very narrow field, which is in technology. And last 12 years, I've been in AI space. First, as an entrepreneur, I started India's first AI chatbot company called Vimagino. We built the technology, but we couldn't sell it. So it was a very humbling experience. Then I spent a year in the Valley understanding the difference the ecosystem has over there versus in India. And I came back to India with a view that we want to build this kind of ecosystem in India. Why? For doing cutting edge companies, you have to travel to somewhere in Silicon Valley. So with that in mind, me and my partner Manish, we started Pi Ventures. It was India's only focused AI focused venture fund, early stage. We raised 225 crores, and we were very lucky to get uh, extremely good support from, of course, government of India, but then also folks like Sunil Kanmunjal, then SIDBI, IFC, World Bank, CDC, and the new age entrepreneurs, Bini, Mohandas Pai, all of them actually supported us, and we supported almost close to 14 companies. But very quickly we realized that the kind of depth of startups that we were seeing in US or in China or even in small place like Israel was not actually there in India. So I went back to government of India with the perspective that, hey, we need to do something about it, and worked very closely with Niti and DST. And last to last year, government of India actually rolled out $500 million of investment into AI research and innovation ecosystem under NMICPS mission, National Mission on Interdisciplinary Cyber Physical Systems. And this art park, AI and robotics technology park, got established under that mission with seed grant of 170 crores from Department of Science and Technology and 60 crores from government of Karnataka, with a view of spearheading India's foray into AI and robotics research and research translation. It is promoted by Indian Institute of Science and supported by AI Foundry. The key perspective that we thought we would set ourselves as a vision is to actually have inclusive AI and robotics revolution. And when I say inclusive, it's with a very specific focus, because when we talk about cutting edge technology, we typically talk about technology being focused to solve the problems which probably face maybe 1% of the total population, maybe the rich and the creamy part of the population. But what about the others? Because fundamentally, what I believe is that the technology can be used to change the lives of people. And I think the change is going to be much more impactful if you actually are able to direct the technology to serve the billions, as we call them. So that is where we are working. One of the interesting areas in Art Park we are exploring is how do we grow this drone as a huge revolution that we see out there. As a kid, I've always personally dreamt of flying. I used to love kites. I used to make them all the time. Till the money ran out, and we would make the kites with paper, and then graduate to trying to build planes. And of course, I grew up in a very small place. You'll not get these aero modeling kits, and those planes will be very hard to fly as well. But that dream has remained with us, and that's where I feel the drones actually have a very inherent appeal to all of us, especially in India, because so used to seeing the kites flying around in the sky. And I feel we've started to just scratch the surface in terms of applications. And as you pointed out that yes, the photography is a good early interesting market, but we're just starting with the whole revolution. That's what my perspective is.
When we talk about drone technology, it is the kind of technology that you underlined, right? Like the technology that can actually impact people's lives, especially in a country like India. And what we are seeing actually in the drone space is basically all the gimmickry, right? Like I was fortunate enough to have witnessed the first time a synchronized drone flight was being done with about 1,200 drones, and for the inauguration of CES a few years back. But all that is gimmickry. It's all dance and drama. But that's not where drones are really going to impact lives. Drones are really going
Absolutely.
to impact lives in last minute delivery, for instance, or in maybe looking at agriculture in a completely different way, and
Yeah.
looking at a lot of other fields, especially in a country like India where we have deficiency in certain resources, where drones can actually plug those gaps. So in that space, sir,
Absolutely.
how is the conversation happening in India? We have had a little bit of a bumpy start because we did not have a policy. We had a free for all for some time. Then we had this period where we were waiting for policy, and there was nothing was happening. People were bringing in drones. I've seen it in front of my eyes, like at the customs guy asking him, will you break the drone or should I break it for you? So even we were in that
Yeah.
phase too, and now we are. So to start, where do you think we are right now? In the drone
Yeah.
space.
No, I think we are at a very very promising place right now. Given that what were the major policy challenges and hurdles that were there actually before. I mean, practically, if you had to fly a drone earlier, you have to fill up like you know quite a number of forms, and then you need to wait for permission. And even after that, and just to give you a perspective, we were trying to evaluate a startup almost 4 years back, and we wanted to invest in them, right? But the key point where we stopped making the decision because we felt that okay, policy environment is not clear, right? And we unfortunately had to tell the startup the same thing, and it was sad because so I'm an alumnus of IIT Kanpur, and one of the really early startups actually came out of IIT Kanpur. I know them because they were juniors and they've been doing some amazing stuff. They beat out Lockheed Martin in probably in 2013 or so in the test, but they couldn't sell it to defense, right? And so there were multiple challenges that I saw in terms of adoption. One, uh, a large number of drone early adoption, if you're looking from as a nation's perspective, one is definitely the big area is going to be defense, right? Because that's where I mean, defense, any technology, cutting edge technology always gets adopted first in defense, right? And for a long time the startups were not even able to sell to defense the technology, because that whenever you're selling to defense, it allows you that extra margin, which through which you can then innovate into other areas, right? So that was not open, but now I think I see that defense is quite open for startups. If the drone startups, if you have capability, you can go and talk to them, and they're willing to listen, engage. You have IDEX challenges running, so that part is open now. The second part is where we're talking about the dual use applications, right, which is on the civilian side, right? And some of them you pointed out. I'll give you one example. One of the startups that we are supporting at ArtPark, it's a very interesting startup called General Aviation, GA, we call them in short. they have been using these drones to actually, spray pesticides. Because I'll give you one perspective. I mean, all of us, I mean, in India we love chilies and all that, right? But the challenging part in chilies is that they are, they get into, different kind of attacks by, different kind of pests, right? So typically what they recommend is that you should be spraying the pesticide in, once in 8 days, right? However, when we found out on the ground that, because the spraying method, when you actually walk around and try to spray, is very ineffective, right? They had to literally spray after each alternate day, right? That means that you're getting almost 4 to 5 times more pesticide in your food, because chili is used so commonly, right? And because of that, the farmers are not able to export, because then they don't meet those norms which allow them to export outside, because the pesticide levels are high. And of course they get consumed within India, which is also equally bad. So it's a loss for everyone. And what these guys are doing is that they have actually a super efficient sprayer, which they're able to mount it on a drone, and then they're actually able to spray them really really efficiently, right? So they actually have to spray once in 10 days, right? So the there are two things that happen with it. One, the cost of pesticides actually go down for the farmer, because he's actually spending less money. Second, the markets open up, right? So now the same farmer can then export it into Europe, in US, where there are very stringent norms about like how much pesticides that you can actually have. And this is a real example. This is as ground on the ground example as that can happen, right? And this is just a beginning. The other parts that I see, right, like logistics is another big example that I see, right? Like if you look at northeastern areas, right, another startup that we are actually supporting, called CD Robotics, under ARTPARK, CD Space Robotics. They actually flew a medicine delivery drone in Uttarakhand in 2019. Okay, and it's a very interesting because it was a BV loss flight. Okay, beyond visual line of sight, and they were able to reach a higher terrain which was inaccessible in 40 minutes, and it was completely, everything was automated. And they did this pilot in 2019. Okay, but the policy was not very clear. So in fact, in some sense their flight was illegal, so as to speak, right? But now it is legal, so they stopped actually going forward in that path, because they realized that, hey, we might be contravening some laws here and there, right? uh, but if you really see, especially in northeastern areas, or even areas which are, when we are talking about villages, right? So we have close to 500,000 villages in our country. 40% of them don't have all weather roads. Now that's a large number, right? I mean, even after 75 years of independence, we don't have all weather roads. Now if we have to reach them, and reach them in emergency, and we've seen that, work very closely with the government on the COVID wave 2, it was really tragic, right? Like people, scores of people, they're dying because maybe the medicines are not there, or the supplies are not getting replenished. So in fact, what we are doing is that we are actually turbocharging that whole sector, where you can actually have the essential supplies. And I'll give you a perspective how that changes the supply chain, right? The moment you actually have a supply chain which is very efficient, in the sense that, hey, I have a need of a certain drug, I can order it, maybe which is like 100 kilometers, and 100 kilometers may not seem big, but when you're talking about Uttarakhand, or you're talking about Assam, which are inaccessible places, 100 kilometers could mean maybe, maybe a day as well, right? Or maybe in some cases it could be even a couple of days, right? Because of that, what they have been doing is that they've been actually stocking the essential, drugs. Now what happens with that is that not only you're stocking yourself, you're actually denying the stock to somebody else as well, right? Now if we actually are able to say, hey, you could be in village, you could be in a small town, but I could give you the essential supplies in 30 minutes time, or an hour's time, right? All of your supply chain then becomes thinner, right? So that means that the same level of medicine could be enough to supply a whole district, because you don't need that much, you don't need to stock that much, right? And we are starting with, let's say, medicines, right? But then, it could then extend to other things, right? So if you are seeing that there's a whole bunch of these ads that are appearing, right, like 15 minutes, they will deliver the stuff. So I see what's actually going to happen is that the delivery, the logistics, where India spends close to 12% of the cost, right? If you have to ship anything by road, it costs like 15 rupees per kg, right? If you have to ship anything by air, right now it is 45 rupees per kg. If you ship it through drones with the current battery, the costs that are there, it comes out to be around 35 rupees per kg. But in another 5 to 6 years, I see that it might be cheaper for you to go through air than on the ground. And that's a revolution that I see will really unite India in one way, but it will really open up, because then if you're a farmer which is growing some maybe some let's say ashwagandha in a small place in Uttarakhand, you would be able to access and tap onto markets with much lower cost, which could be in Delhi, which could be outside India, which could connect you to the global supply chain. So these are two major areas where I see it having a much larger impact, right, in terms of just boosting the efficiency. So if we bring the logistics cost down in the country from 12 to 15% of the GDP to maybe like 5 to 6%, right, which is the global norm, we could really then unleash, because then that much of cost you can then spread it around, right? Today we are wasting it because half of that cost goes into fuel, more than actually half, right? I mean, almost 80-85% of the cost is in the fuel, which we have to import, right? And second, it is not efficient at all. That means that we are piling things everywhere. So if we can actually migrate to a supply chain which is much leaner, which is connecting everyone, we would be storing less. And if we are storing less, that means we are optimizing. So the cycle turns that we talk about in supply chain dynamics, which will be much more. And then that's where I see that it's not just the linear profit that will actually unleash, but it will be a non-linear kind of profits that will actually unleash with drone revolution. And this is just the logistics. The next big frontier that I see is human transportation, right? So even though we have these udan schemes and all that, they still are based on this hub and spoke kind of a model, right, where you go to the smaller airports, they'll take you to the bigger airports, then you fly, right? And that is a bit tricky, because then you have to build these big airports which may not be sustainable in quite a few cities, right? In fact, that prompted us to talk about connecting the unconnected. It's a kind of a moonshot ideation that we are having together with Niti, where we are trying to see that what will really happen if instead of these smart cities we are able to build these smart clusters, okay, which would be linked by not just by ground but also air transportation, right? And this could be for not just for logistics but also for people, right? So we're thinking of an autonomous air ambulance, and that's a concept that we are pushing for. Of course, it's going to take a while to build that, but imagine if we are able to take care of people, in especially in the golden hour, right? Like because right now, even with the road accidents, right, we are losing close to 1,500 people a day, in terms of people who die because they can't reach the hospital, right? If you just build it for that golden hour delivery, right, and that could come through air, and it could be autonomous in nature, it will save lives not only in road accidents but heart attacks, stroke patients, all of them actually require attention at the golden hour. So the way I see is that we have of course, starting with maybe we started with recreational aspects in drones, but then we will move into the applications that we are seeing in agriculture, then we are seeing it in logistics, and then maybe with even in transportation. And that's a massive spread that I see for drones.
In the past few years, I've seen how even companies like Uber are thinking about the concepts that you mentioned of transporting humans, right? And you have all sorts of thinking coming in, because all sorts of companies are thinking about what they can do in this space. But this also means that our policy thinking also has to be literally ahead of the times. And if you look at the policy as somebody who's part of the system in a way, are you happy with where we are from a policy perspective, or do you think we also need to start thinking about this, the dynamic of new scenarios, new opportunities opening up?
No, I think we have. I'm very happy. I mean, given the rate of change that was there earlier, I think where we are, I think we are rocketing, right? We are rocketing to catch up to the world, right? I mean, literally, if you had asked me 4 years back, I would have told a startup that, hey, it's tough environment here. Maybe you should migrate to outside India to do your startup because young founders. I've been an entrepreneur myself, and these are things beyond your control, right? But right now the policy environment is extremely supportive. Ministry of Civil Aviation, they are thinking ahead. MeitY, Ministry of IT, they are thinking ahead. So I feel that if you are an entrepreneur or if you are somebody who wants to get into the drone space, this is a fantastic time to for you to be out there innovating, because you could innovate together with the rest of the world, and that's a big plus. I always feel that in India we have really talented entrepreneurs. I've looked at entrepreneurs across the globe, and I literally feel that Indian entrepreneurs are literally the ones which are trying to bloom roses in midst of desert, in some sense. But if you actually give them supportive policy environment, then these the roses could become a huge forest very quickly, and I think that's what is happening now. And I see so many exciting young companies coming up. The other day I was talking to somebody. This is a company which is again trying to do robo taxi, and it's interesting that they think the first markets might be in India, right? Because and it's very interesting to think that way, because if you fundamentally see, when we think about roads, right, we are trying to solve a three-dimensional problems because we live in flats, right? But then at the end of the day, when we have to go somewhere, we are on these two-dimensional solutions, which are roads, right? Which is fundamentally not tenable at all, right? For three-dimensional problems we need three-dimensional solutions, and that's where flying is a way more what should I say, natural solution. Of course, we need to do a lot of work in terms of proofing the frames, airframes, then proofing the technology, working on the batteries, making sure that the cost per kg remains in that band. And of course, we need to build what we call as the flyways, or the roads in the sky, right? Because just like you have roads on the ground, we need to do that, and we need to build that infrastructure. But with 5G, that's also something that we're working on at ARTPARK. We're trying to see if we can actually come up with a common standard for roads in the sky, because without that it is very tricky. Maybe one or two drones flying around, it's we can still manage. But when you talk about hundreds of drones taking off, you need to manage them, and you can't manage them manually at all, right? Like right now you have few planes and you have an ATC tower which is able to manage communication and make sure that there are no incidences happening. But when we're talking about drones, it has to be completely automated, all the aspects, authorization, the way they access the airspace, the way they get granted a certain height, time pocket, everything has to be automated. And that is, we were talking about UTM, but I think it goes far beyond that. And that's a space that we need to, literally, academia has to come together, industry has to come together, government has to come together, and we have to solve that problem.
Which is the last question I wanted to ask you, is that how once this perfect scenario of all the drones taking off is fulfilled, how do we manage that? Because if we end up having what we have on the roads in India in our skies too, then then we could be in a little bit of a trouble. So in that space, do you think this has to come from a government, where the government says, hey, this is how it is going to be, or do you think it will be easy for multiple stakeholders to come up with that standard, that or that mechanism, is that going to be the easy way around? And internationally, how is this being thought through? Because you have countries where the unmanned aerial vehicle scenario is much ahead of us in a way. So how are they thinking of this problem, because they might actually be closer to the bridge than us?
No, you're right. I think what we are seeing is that this evolution of space is an interesting one. there are a few approaches people have tried. People have tried to take the UTM perspective that they had with respect to the larger planes and then shrink it down, right? And that's where people are trying out. So some of the companies that were there in that aviation sector, they're trying to do that, right? Saying that, hey, this is going to be a small subset of the problem that was already there, right? uh, we fundamentally believe that that approach may not serve us well. These are different perspectives, dimensions, and we might need a solution which is very, very different. I'll give you a perspective, right? Like when an aircraft takes off, right, uh, for the management of the airspace, they pay a fee. X amount of money goes to people who are having the infrastructure for that. But if you apply the same fee to a small drone, right, which maybe for logistic reasons, or maybe for maybe trying to take people up, uh, the cost parameters don't make sense for them, because it's a completely different paradigm. It's like the same cost, maybe a train operator might pay. I'm asking you to pay when you're driving your car, right? So it's literally that perspective shift that we need to talk about, right? So I think, and I see that as an opportunity, that the standards in that space, when we're talking about how do we manage drones in the sky, they're still evolving. And that's where we feel that it's a big opportunity as a country like India, who might be a big adopter of drones. We can actually get together, industry can get together with academia and government, and shape these standards. So at Art Park, we are trying to bring that kind of consortium together with Indian Institute of Science, with some of the startups that we are working with, then of course the large companies that we are collaborating with as well, and of course the government, because government has to eventually enforce that in terms of regulation, and so that everybody's interests are taken care of, right? I mean, government is, in my view, it's like a large cooperative, right? I mean, all of us pay taxes at the end of the day, right? So in the eyes of the government, everybody is equal, right? So they have to look at it from the safety perspective. They have to look at from, okay, if I operate it, does it make sense? Does it make things easy for all the citizens? If the cost parameters are not which will actually make it accessible for everyone, then it could become tricky, because then it is serving a very small section of the society, but airspace might belong to everyone, right? So that's where I feel that the path forward is that industry, academia, and government come together in a consortium, and we arrive at a common set of standards, saying that, hey, this is where, just like you have standards when you operate on the roads, you need to get a license, you need to make sure that your vehicle is less polluting, it is worthy of the road. Then of course there are specific rules that you need to obey when you are on the road. So similarly, we would have the same thing coming up for drone as well.
Thank you, Mr. Soni, for a very insightful conversation on a topic that a lot of people want to know more about. And I'm sure this is evolving, and maybe 6 months down the line, we will have a lot more to discuss and lot more ideas to uh, to dig deeper into. Thank you, Mr. Soni, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you as well. Thank you.
So that was Mr. Umakant Soni of Art Park, and we'll be back again with another guest. This is Nandagopal Rajan saying bye again.